Okay, so firstly and foremostly, I want to say that I really did enjoy episode 5 of Loki. I did. That being said, I am very worried about the finale. And I don't think those two statements are mutually exclusive. I really don't. Let's talk about it. If you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed already, then please make sure to do so and join the Access Blockbusters crew. We got new episodes of the Access Blockbusters pod coming out every single Friday. I'm so excited to talk about all the things in the world of movies and television with you guys. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of Loki episode 5? And let's get into this episode. So, I liked this episode. I thought it was very, very solid, and I don't think that it was nearly as bad as episode 3, thank goodness. Although I don't also think it's nearly as strong as episodes 1, 2, and 4. I think it's pretty up there, but I don't think it's quite to that same level. But this episode has got me very worried about the finale. So what today's video is going to be, and the structure of how I'm going to talk about this episode, is like this. I'm going to briefly go through the episode and recap it and talk about my favorite moments and the things that I did like, things that I didn't like, and give overall thoughts on the episode. And then I want to dedicate some time to talking about the big question that has to be answered in episode 6, which is, who is behind the TVA? And I'm going to discuss the two theories that I think are the most likely. And then, of course, at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about why I think it's setting up to be a disappointing finale for this series, which, again, would be heartbreaking to me. But we'll talk about that in just a second. So let's go through some of the big highlights of episode 5 of Loki. First of all, what did I think about the interactions between Loki and the other Lokis? I thought for the most part, they were actually really good. I was a little skeptical, especially seeing the costumes on Richard E. Grant's classic Loki, and of course seeing Alligator Loki and Boastful Loki, Kid Loki. I was like, okay, where are we going with this? But I liked how this was all sort of playing on these different variations of who the character of Tom Hiddleston's Loki could be. For example, I love that Richard E. Grant's Loki is Tom Hiddleston's Loki if he had survived Infinity War. I especially love how he talks about how he could have possibly survived by projecting himself as debris. Or at least projecting himself first and then pretending to be debris. I thought that was excellent because, if you guys remember back in 2018 when Infinity War came out, everybody was speculating, is Loki going to come back? Did he survive? And people were even zooming in on that frame when he was killed by Thanos and he was next to his brother Thor of, is that piece of debris actually Loki? And I love that. And similarly, I love the President Loki scene. Do I wish it was a little longer? Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was very heavily promoted in the marketing, and I thought that that was going to be a huge part of episode 5. Turns out it was just a fun little scene. And I think I have to just temper my expectations a little bit with shots that are coming from the trailer. For example, the whole Pompeii thing turned out to just be a little gag, the DB Cooper thing, a little gag, and this President Loki thing, a very fun little fight in the lair, and I loved it. Now, going back to the TVA for just a second, we have Sylvie confronting Ravonna Renslayer, and I think it's very clear that Ravonna knows a lot. While it wasn't explicitly made clear about how much she knows, and that was a little disappointing because the end of episode 4 was, tell me everything. And she really didn't tell Sylvie anything at all. But still, it's made pretty clear that Ravonna is up to no good. Now, whether or not she actually knows who is behind the TVA remains to be seen. She is putting up this pretense of, I need to find out with Sylvie. But again, basically everything the TVA has been saying has been a lie. For example, it looks like now Miss Minutes is in league with this evil organizer of the TVA because she's going along trying to stall Sylvie while Ravonna gets the guards in. So we'll see. And then Sylvie prunes herself and ends up back in the void, and we see her with Mobius. And thank God Mobius was in this episode again. Now, was it a little bit easy to me that he just kind of escaped with a temp pad? Like, oh, bye, I'm leaving. Kind of, like, that insinuates that you can just get to the void with a temp pad and you can just leave whenever you want if you have a temp pad, which I guess the thousands and hundreds of millions of variants that they've pruned didn't have temp pads or got eaten by Goliath. I'm not entirely sure, but I guess Mobius had a temp pad that Sylvie stole, and that was that. Felt a little easy to me, I'm not sure. Now, the whole conversation between Loki and Sylvie, look, I have said this before, I am not necessarily the biggest fan of them being a romantic couple. I think that's where it's going, although they could surprise us in episode 6, and I just don't quite buy the chemistry yet. I am warming up to the character of Sylvie on her own, but I don't think I would really enjoy them being a romantic pair. I think Tom Hiddleston is really selling his love for Sylvie. I don't think that Sophia DiMartino, whether or not this is intentional or just an accident, is reciprocating that same amount of love. I'm not entirely sure. You guys let me know in the comments what you guys think. And then the big battle with Goliath, and Richard E. Grant's classic Loki has that awesome moment where he projects Asgard. They defeat Goliath, and they head in to whatever is going on at the end of time. Now, comparing this episode very briefly to episode 3, I think this was a much better job of filling in the story with something that's maybe not as consequential, but also meaningful at the same time. I think episode 3, and I maintain this, is entirely useless, the story at least. Because it's like they were at point A, they went to point B, and then they went into episode 3 and they got sent back to point A, a different point A regardless, but then they had to get back to point B at the beginning of episode 4, and it was like, what was the point? So I'm at least glad to see that this episode had some consequence, although it felt a little light on plot, especially because this was the penultimate episode. Now let's talk about the two main possibilities of who I think is at the end of time, and these are probably the biggest theories that have been going around anyways, so I'm just going to reiterate them here and sort of go through the evidence of what I think is going on. First of all, obviously, Kang. Now look, all signs in this episode are pointing to Kang. I mean, Alioth being there has a great comic connection with Kang, of course. There was Kang Tower, Qeng, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Kang Tower is from the comics. And it's basically when Tony Stark sold Stark Tower to Kang, and he renamed it Qeng, Kang Tower. And so there's another sign pointing to Kang the Conqueror. And again, this whole idea of being at the end of time, I believe that was a part of Kang in the comic books. So there are a lot of signs pointing to Kang the Conqueror. However, the other possibility, and the one that I keep going back to, is that it's an alternate version of Loki, or He Who Remains, or a combination of both. And for those of you who don't know, He Who Remains is an entity in the comic books who is essentially the last TVA agent and is at the end of the timeline. I wouldn't be surprised if they combined some variation of Loki plus He Who Remains and made that one character. I mean, they clearly did the same thing with Sylvie and Lady Loki, Enchantress, right? And the reason I bring this up, even though all signs are pointing to Kang, is that this just fits thematically with the story about identity, about Loki figuring out who he is, and it would make so much sense in a story about Loki that it was Loki who was pulling the strings all the time. I think that just fits so well into the narrative. Plus, I mean, for us comic book fans, we know who Kang the Conqueror is, and we're so excited to see Jonathan Majors play the character in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but the general audience has no idea who Kang is. And it would be kind of out of nowhere for most people if he just popped up. Again, I think all signs are pointing to Kang, but this could be just another misdirect of the director going, hey, we're pointing to one thing, but we're going to do another thing. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised at this point. So it's kind of honestly because they are pointing to Kang that I'm going to go with the theory right now, at least, that it's another Loki. As weird as that sounds. But finally, before we close out this video, let's talk about the finale. Now look, I've made a video about this, about WandaVision and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and why those two series finales were disappointing. And one of the things that I said was that there were just too many things that were left unresolved by the second to last episode that the finale simply couldn't answer satisfyingly. Again, Loki episode 6 could change my mind completely. But there are still a surprising amount of loose threads here. And while it's a little bit different, and I'll go into that in just a second, it still makes me worried that they're going to rush the finale and just pop up this big villain and be like, oh hey, look, here's Kang, the end. Now what's a little bit different about Loki, unlike WandaVision for example, is that all these loose plot threads seem to be heading towards the same thing, which is who is running the TVA. WandaVision had just too many unconnected plot threads. For example, you had Hayward, you had Monica Rambeau, you had the twins, White Vision, who was introduced at the last second, you had regular Westview Vision, you had Wanda Maximoff, you had all of these things that eventually didn't come together in a satisfying way. Not to mention Ralph, of course. We can't forget Ralph. Loki, on the other hand, all of the plot threads seem to be heading in the same direction, which is at least a more encouraging sign. Ravonna Renslayer, Mobius heading to the TVA to quote-unquote burn it down. Loki and Sylvie heading to that castle where probably the main villain is going to be. I just worry that the show didn't reveal enough in the second to last episode, that the last episode is going to have way too many answers, and I'm afraid that some of these answers aren't going to be satisfying for the audience. And not because of our fan theories, because look, it's one thing to say, oh, I want it to be Kang, it's not Kang, I hate this show. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the show presents itself and is like, hey, it's Trevor Slattery, and the audience goes, what? And again, Marvel is not past doing this. Again, look at WandaVision. They did the exact same thing with Pietro. So we'll see. Because look, honestly, I think my enjoyment and overall rating of the show is going to depend on the finale. I said that about WandaVision. It didn't end up being entirely true because I thought the finale was okay, and I still love the show. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was fine, had a fine finale. But this show in particular is hinging itself on the question of who is in charge of the TVA. And honestly, if they don't deliver on something big, and I'm not saying big in terms of theories, I'm saying big in terms of what fits in the story, then they're in for a world of hurt. So we will see. I didn't love episode 5, I didn't hate episode 5, and I in fact liked episode 5 quite a bit. But I do think that while it doesn't say that episode 6 is going to be a disaster necessarily, it didn't set itself up quite as well as I thought it should have. But that's just me. So what were your thoughts on Loki episode 5? Let me know in the comments down below. We got some awesome stuff coming up for you in the Access Blockbusters channel. On Friday, we're going to be launching episode 4 of Access Blockbusters Pod, all new, all renovated, with a co-host. Going to be super exciting, so stay tuned for that. On Sunday is going to be my non-spoiler and spoiler review of Black Widow. Can't wait to share that with you guys as well. And just look forward to more awesome content from the channel. I'm super excited. So if you haven't subscribed, then please make sure to do so and give this video a like. And if you want to check out some more videos, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.